So, Heather, another week. We have, it's, there is tragedy, there is farce, then there's more tragedy in many respects, and then just a lot of sheer insanity that's going on. That is the world that we're living in. We're dealing now with over 60,000 Americans have died, over 1 million have been infected. It is really unclear. Let's say we have a million recorded cases. We don't really know how many cases that we've had in the country because a significant portion of those will be asymptomatic. There are, guesstimates based upon some very rough surveys of people. It's possible the infection rate in New York City could have been and could be as high as 20 to 25%. My suspicion is it's on the low end of that, but I think it could be 15 to 20%. And then around the country, it could be 5%. This is important to note because there's only really two ways that this ends, and that is through a vaccination or through herd immunity. And vaccination, at the earliest is going to be 18 months off. And then who knows? Maybe, I've seen estimates that say 5-10 years. Herd immunity would come at the cost of, close to 1 million Americans' lives. People can do the math more or less on this. And that's if we do it in a sort of almost controlled way, and that would take some time as well. In the meantime, we're just trying to, what would be nice is to get some broad principles so that we could not necessarily go back to pre-COVID, but to sort of begin to live with this for, an interim period of time as our economy and sort of the social fabric is beginning to fray. The economy is a disaster. I just don't think that we realize it yet. So with all of that going on, that's just our context. There's a lot of news within that context at this point, not the least of which is, I think, on top of everything that's happening with the Trump administration and what they're doing with the red states and why the red states are doing this and how they're beginning to slowly really screw working people and broadly all of us, short of corporations. Many people obviously are paying a lot of attention to the election and the polling on one hand, and on the other hand, this burgeoning, I don't know what you call this, controversy around Joe Biden regarding Tara Reade. I think you and I have mentioned it a little bit in the past, but the story got at least more corroboration this week. An investigative piece by his first name escapes me, but McHugh, who was a producer who worked with Ronan Farrow. So a lot of respect within the sort of like journalistic industry. And talking to a former neighbor of Tara Reade's who said, yeah, I remember her telling me about this in 1993. And this is someone who is a Biden supporter, ostensibly. Where are we at with this, Heather?
Well, this is a very tough situation, I think, for progressive women to deal with for obvious reasons. I don't think anybody wants to be dealing with something like this in the middle of the crisis that you just described, which is, kind of world-ending. And this isn't something, but it must be dealt with. It has to be. It is part of our reality. And so I have several thoughts on it. And I don't, obviously I don't know all the facts. I don't think anybody does. But to the extent we know what we know about it, as a feminist and a progressive woman, this is disturbing. It's a disturbing, sort of illustration of the kind of, this same kind of thing that we've been seeing through the whole Me Too era here where, you're finding out that men who were ostensibly, sort of normal behaving men, you find out that, in private moments were not like that. And I was working not in Washington in the early 90s, but I'm old enough to have been working. I was a working woman in the early 90s in a corporate setting, and I can tell you that it's absolutely true that men that you didn't expect to have behaved in these sorts of ways, whether it's harassment or I suppose assault as well, did. The nice family man, the guy who supposedly is just a regular guy, and suddenly you find out that there's all these, instances of them doing these sorts of things because they could get away with it. And I'll just say right up front, as a feminist, I'm sick of it, and I am tired of having to deal with this over and over and over again. But I will also say that I'm a civil libertarian, and I believe in due process, and I believe in looking at evidence, and I don't the whole idea of, what we were saying, believe women, I don't think it ever should have been believe women. We should respectfully listen to women and take their complaints seriously and their charges seriously and look at it, instead of dismissing them, as has been done for decades, maybe centuries, millennia. The whole system that was sort of rose up around sexual assault, sexual harassment, and this idea that you could sweep this stuff under the rug, that had to change, that you had to be looking at these things from the standpoint of taking it as seriously as you would any other crime, instead of sort of making the assumption, which I think the assumption was, well, she's making it up, or she's a liar, or whatever. I mean, this would happen unless a woman was, beaten to a pulp. They didn't even, necessarily even want to entertain the idea that this might have happened, particularly with famous and important men. So, I absolutely believe in that. But having said that, you have to have some due process. There's a reason why we had the statute of limitations. There are reasons why there needed to be truly, contemporaneous accounts. And in this case, the neighbor who was revealed this week, it wasn't contemporaneous. It was several years later. And there are a lot of things about her story that are questionable. And I'm not saying she's not telling the truth, but I am saying that if you are a civil libertarian, you can't look at a case like this and just say it's open and shut, that there's no problem. So I am keeping an open mind on that. As I said, as a feminist, I'm sick of this stuff, and if this is the way it goes, this is the way it goes for Joe Biden. But I am also keeping an open mind on the fact that there are perhaps, some reasons that we might not be aware of, whether it's political or some kind of an agenda, that could be driving some of this. Finally, I'll just say this. My political analysis of this is absolutely horrifying, because what I see is the idea that, Joe Biden, he may drop out or, be forced to drop out or doesn't drop out. And what we wind up with is a horrible fight, a delegate fight in the middle of July in a virtual, half-baked, complete shit show of a convention, and it will not be easy to choose a replacement. And that has me absolutely terrified, because if the Democrats can do one thing, focus on one thing and one thing alone, it's that they are going to be the more competent captain at the helm of this horrifying situation we're in, and try to get us out of it. Because with 30 million people unemployed right now, and how many of them are even going to be back at work in July? I don't know.
None.
But the idea that the Democrats show themselves to be just doing a complete, having a fight over a 30-year-old, allegation that is probably unprovable, and then they go through this, I just think that's devastating for the Democratic Party, for the chances of winning. I think we could still win. I think they could still do it, but it's just like throwing up every roadblock in the world here to make it happen. And that just has me tossing and turning and losing sleep at night. So I hope there's some kind of resolution to this that doesn't get us to that convention. I really do.
I mean, okay, so I'm with you. I don't think it is obvious one way or another in terms of whether Biden was guilty of this. I really, I don't. I do think that it is not obvious at all that this is a fake allegation. Let's put it that way to me. And so this is a serious allegation. I think it has credibility. That doesn't necessarily mean it's correct. Like you, it is not hard for me to imagine that a senator in 1993, thought that this woman was interested in him and thought that this was an appropriate way to, respond to that belief. It's not inconceivable to me that that's the way that he approached that. I mean, the thing that sticks in my craw about this whole thing, and I do not think that we're ever going to be able to know the truth of this. I just don't think it's possible. And I don't know that there can be I don't know what the preponderance of the evidence would be if it was ever to go to trial, which it won't. But one thing that does stick out in my mind is that something happened at that time. And what it is, we don't know, but it caused her to lose her responsibilities in the office. Now, the range of what those things were could be, and her mother apparently thought it was a problem. I think that's the word she used when she called into Larry King. And that could mean Joe Biden did what he did, or he did something along those lines. Or it could mean that Tara Reade was in some way like inappropriate in the work that she did and therefore was demoted, by the, or maybe, there was something that was a problem that at the very least Tara Reade went home and said there was a problem at work. And there was, we know there was a problem because she also lost, we know from the interns that she managed that there was something there. And what strikes me is that there has been the only response from the Biden staff was don't remember anything about it. Don't remember that there was a problem. Whether they were talking about, Joe Biden doing something inappropriate or Tara Reade doing something inappropriate, but something clearly happened. And so that to me just says, like, we need to resolve that question. Like, why did they take action like they did at that time? And that to me, there should be notes, right? Like, I mean, because in 1993, if you're working on the Hill and you were going to demote somebody, there should be some type of paper trail about why you did that. And, I want to know what that is. Now, I don't know if it's knowable. There's papers at his, library, but they aren't necessarily organized or anything like that. So who knows? But so let's just look at it this way. There's two scenarios. One is Joe Biden did what he was accused of. And the other scenario is that he didn't, right? I mean, one of those two things is true. And I'm not sure, because we can't know definitively how much, from just a strictly like ethical perspective, we can make an assessment as to what to do about that. Right. Yeah. Because, I just don't know what we can do. And I don't know that we can say with even 80% assuredness this happened. And I don't think we can say with 80% assuredness this didn't happen. I'm not even sure we can say it with like 55% on either way. I mean, I just don't know. But we can assess it from a political perspective. And there's enough corroboration, it seems to me, that this won't be ignored. 2 weeks ago, I talked about this. I think you and I talked about it. And my feeling was like, I suspect this goes away. It may not be the right thing. It might not be the moral thing or ethical, but I suspect the Democratic voters don't care. But we are getting to a point with the story that there is enough information that it might be very, very hard to ignore as a, from any perspective. Like, it might begin to impact Democratic voters who were going to vote for Joe Biden before.
I don't think there's any doubt that it's going to impact. For one thing, there is no doubt that the right wing is on this. They're talking about nothing else. I mean, this is if you go to any right wing website or you watch Fox News, this is all over it. And that, so we know that about them, and we know that that there are plenty of people on the left who are upset about this and who are also extremely concerned. Where we're in the rock and a hard place here is that I suspect that there are a lot of people, and I think if you look at the Fire Chris Hayes hashtag, that you're going to see a lot of people on the Democratic side who are also on the other side of it saying, you can't talk about it, I don't want to hear about it, don't you dare do this, Joe Biden is our only hope, and how dare you, do this thing in the middle of this horrible situation. I mean, and the fact is, this is how I look at it. If this were a normal primary, we'd still be in the primaries, or at least more or less in the primaries. I doubt that Sanders would have, dropped out at this, in April. It was a normal primary. We're coming up to a normal convention. We're going to run against Donald Trump in the fall, and there was no pandemic. I absolutely feel it would be entirely possible that Joe Biden would just drop out over this because it would be too much, and then the strain would be too much. Or if not, there would be a strong push to get him out. Or maybe even shift the results of the later primaries that would still be coming up to somebody else, and maybe there would then be a real delegate fight. But I could easily see this because, it is serious enough. It is something that is being talked about. There's no avoiding it, that in a normal campaign season, I think this would be, truly devastating to Joe Biden. But we're not, obviously. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and the world economy is cratering right now. And we have, people dying in massive numbers. So that puts this whole thing into a different perspective. And that's where I'm sitting as somebody who, I don't care about Biden. I never liked him. I have no loyalty to the guy. I don't love politicians in general. To me, make them all women so we don't ever have to deal with this again. I'd be fine with that. But because we're in this dire situation, the calculation here, the moral calculation, if not the political calculation, is different than it normally would be. And so I'm sitting here going, I don't know what's going to happen here. I can't predict it. I really can't. I could predict it if we were in a normal situation, but I can't. So, I don't know what to say about it, Sam. This is very, very difficult. It really is. It's bothering me a lot because I don't honestly know where this goes. But I do know that if the Democrats don't figure out a way to deal with this, and I'm talking about the Biden campaign, they've got to respond in some way. This is they can't let this go on because they've got to figure out a way to approach this within the actual, parameters of the world we're living in. And I grant you it's hard, but they have to do it. This is what leadership is. And if he doesn't do it, then I think we're facing a November that could be even worse.
I think,
really
just to try and eke out a slight sliver of a silver lining here. It is good that we're doing this in April, right?
Yes.
And as opposed to June and now it's May,
August.
and August and September. Now there's another element, but I want to circle back to what you said because I think that to me is the key. There could be more of these people, right? We don't know. We don't know.
It's possible. Likely, if it's true, there'd be likely more people.
Look at how long it took to get. With Donald Trump, there's 20 women, I think, at least on the record now, accusing him of one form of assault or another, one who accused him of rape in a retail outlet. She didn't come out until late,
Last year.
Yeah. And so, it's not like all of these women who are out there, they may be motivated by how they see Tara Reade treated. And we are still early enough in this process that we don't know how she's going to be treated by the Biden campaign. Now,
right.
And I know you remember this, but one thing that has not gotten any attention, it seems to me, in the conversation about this is, and, I think Rebecca Traister touched on it in her piece, where the burden to absolve Joe Biden of this is going to fall on the very women or type of women who, are most sensitive and upset about this.
Right.
And it's going to fall on his vice presidential nominee, who he's already said is going to be a woman. But what I have not heard talked about is and I don't know how much this dynamic is playing, but one of the things I remember in the wake of Bill Clinton saying, "I did not have sex with that woman," and it's not the exact same. This is not an apples to apples comparison, but it does seem to be the silence from the Biden campaign about this is reminding me of what happened when so many people went out there to defend Bill Clinton and then had their legs cut out from under them, weeks later. And I think that sting is still there. And I think you're absolutely right. This is a question. In some ways, the real test for Joe Biden, because we can never know the reality of this, is how he handles this now. And and he should come out and make sure that it is on him to discuss this. It's not on Kristen Gillibrand. It is not on
Warren or Abrams or any
Warren or Abrams or anybody else or Klobuchar. It is on Joe Biden, and he's got to come out and both, I think, acknowledge the seriousness of the allegation. I think he's also got to have an answer of what happened in that office, because something happened. Unless something happened. It may have been innocent, very innocent, but something happened enough so that her job was switched, and she told her mom that there was a problem with my boss, and the mom was upset enough to call into Larry King. Something happened. They need to provide that answer to the American public, and particularly the Democratic Party. And he needs to come out and say, look, we're gonna answer the questions. Nobody else has to answer these questions. These questions are for me and my campaign to answer. And in some respects, that test, that to me is the test, because I don't know that we can answer this from a moral grounds as to whether or not he is guilty of this. I just don't know that we're ever going to know. We could have some type of investigation, I guess, but there's no time. This is not like, I think Al Franken should have gone to that ethics committee investigation. He made the choice not to. There was a lot of pressure, granted, but he made that choice. There's no similar dynamic. We saw it with Keith Ellison, maybe, but I just don't know that we have the time, frankly, for that. He's got to come out and make the case, essentially, to the Democratic Party, so that the Democratic Party can feel comfortable that when we get to August, when we get to September, October, that this isn't going to be a political liability of what it looks like it could be. And if he's not able to answer that, then the same people who, and I'm looking at you, Barack Obama, and I'm looking at whatever the other people that convinced everybody, at that point to drop out of the race and endorse Joe Biden, they need to step up because they own this. And, so Joe Biden has a moment where the test is on him.
Yep.
And if he can't do this, then somebody's got to step in. And then, yeah, it's going to be ugly. And I think and then really, frankly, the leadership, the call, the need for leadership, if Joe Biden does in fact, fail this test, the need for leadership then shifts to the other contenders in the race. And they've got to step up and do something that avoids the crap show that you're talking about in the convention. Because it's not like, and I'm a Bernie Sanders supporter, but Bernie Sanders is a distant second. I think numerically, theoretically, he could win at this point if Joe Biden completely evaporated tomorrow and, his name was scrubbed from everything. I think there's enough delegates. It's close. But nevertheless, I don't think that gives you any type of automatic entree into the nomination. And this is a very different situation. And I think then, the call, the need for leadership moves to someone like Sanders and maybe others in that race to sort of work it out on their own on some level and come out and say, hey, we're making an announcement tomorrow. I'm throwing in with this person or I'm throwing in with that person. I mean, that's the only way out of this, it seems to me. It starts with Joe Biden's test. He's got to pass it or fail. And then it moves on. People there's got to be some grown-ups here. Like the risk here is enormous.
It's enormous, and more enormous than it's ever been. I mean, this isn't the first time this stuff has happened, and some people fail and some people pass these tests. I mean, look at Gary Hart. He crumbled under, similar, a sex scandal. Bill Clinton, who first faced his sex scandal during the primaries in 1992 with Jennifer Flowers, and that whole thing came out, and he handled it in a way that got him through, and he ended up winning. And Barack Obama with his, Reverend Wright situation, which was very grave threat to him, and he handled it really, really well, and it saved him. It's that moment, right? And I mean, maybe it really is a test of leadership. You're faced with this kind of stuff, and you got to figure out a way. Now, the stakes are immensely higher now than I think they were in any of those races. I mean, all presidential races are high stakes. I mean, anything can happen, right? They get the nuclear code, so it's all high stakes. But this is particularly high stakes. I mean, we've got 30 million people out of work right now. I mean, that's unprecedented. It's absolutely mind-boggling to even wrap your mind around that, and the fallout from that is going to be extreme. So the test has never been more important, and I'll be looking for that too. I mean, I think that he has to address it. I think he has to do it the way that you're talking about. I think he has to do it with a tremendous amount of sensitivity toward not just the women who everybody's going to look to and force them to answer for whatever this is and put them on the hot spot, as Rebecca Traister said, but also the woman herself, who, whatever you think about her, he has to find a way to show respect for her situation, regardless of whether or not it's what she says he did, just simply because that's, women are going to be hearing this, and he's got to find a way to do that. It's not easy. It's threading a needle, especially if he feels, if he's defending himself and saying, this didn't happen. But the fact is that, and in fact, look back to Bill Clinton. As terrible as that whole situation was, one of the things that he did do that was very smart, and only one of his aides really went out and broke that promise, which was that he didn't get up in front of the country and ever say anything mean about Monica Lewinsky. He never did that. In fact, at one point, I think it was in one of his testimony, whether it's grand jury or whatever, he says, I think she's a good girl. And, this is my doing, and I think I kind of always knew this was going to happen. And I always thought that was smart of him because, you can't, if the minute that, some powerful man goes and starts, insulting a woman or in some way demeaning her in that situation, it's a terrible thing. All it does is, force everybody to cringe. So I'm hopeful that they will find a way to do this and give Tara Reade some sense of dignity in the whole thing.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
some way to sort of be, come out of this, with her own sense of self preserved in the whole thing. And then it's very important that they do this right. It couldn't be more important, Sam. It's the most important thing in the world, because otherwise, if this race turns into a calamity, the world, it's the fate of the world. Seriously, I mean, this is that serious.
And I don't even want to get into my assessment as to whether Biden is up to the task, frankly. But
I don't either. No, I don't either.
that's just too disturbing. But I agree with you. He needs to go out there, and I think he needs to acknowledge that there are going to be people in the Democratic Party. There are going to be people. There are going to be Americans who go to vote who are going to believe that they are voting. They have a choice between two people who have records of assault, sexual assault against women. And I think he has to acknowledge that and say, I can't change that. And it is unfortunate because I know in my heart I didn't do it, something to that effect. And I feel badly for Tara Reade, who is carrying this with her, and I feel badly for Americans who need to go to the polls and make a decision between two people like that and have to ignore those aspects, because I consider myself, someone who has always, took pride in my integrity and my respect for other people, et cetera, et cetera. And but we also have many other issues that people are going to vote on, and it is gravely saddening to me that people won't have that clarity. But I think he has to acknowledge it because people believe it, and it is. I don't know really what I believe. Like I say, usually in these situations, I am for an investigation and allow those investigations. I may be one of the few people in the country who refused to watch the O.J. Simpson trial. Certainly the only one who was even remotely close to news. And because I'm not in a position to judge in those, narrow scenarios.
Right.
But I also, I can't argue to people that it's like obvious he did not do it. Right. I think it's a perfectly legitimate perspective to have that he may have, or that he did. I mean, I don't subscribe to it, but I don't think anybody's irrational to believe that. And I don't think people are irrational to believe that, maybe she's, she's misremembering. Maybe she's enhancing to get more attention. I mean, there's a whole slew of potential takes that you could have on this. But I think the bottom line is, by hook or crook, I mean, look, you don't get to choose the environment that you run in.
That's right.
And he is not the nominee yet. And part, apparently, of his test is going to be to deal with this. And at the very least, they have a responsibility to get on with it. Hanging out, hanging back, this is not good. This is Joe Biden has a responsibility to go out there, put his best foot forward, be judged upon that. And because we need a nominee who is not hobbled by something that is going to, make it harder for mainstream Democrats to vote for this guy.
Exactly. And, I'm sorry, it's a tough situation. I feel, if he didn't do it, I feel bad that he's having to deal with it. But, this is a guy who's going to be the president of the United States, and he's going to be dealing with the worst situation any president has ever come into office dealing with. So this, if he can't handle this, then, we have a bigger problem. I mean, this is not, he has to figure out a way to do it, and that's just all there is to it. And I agree with you. I think that, and I do think it's possible. I mean, I think that, because what we just said, there are often these situations in a presidential race where it's really, this is your test. Can you meet it here? I mean, are you able to do it? And when they are, it actually strengthens them, and when they aren't, it ruins them. And, I got to say, I mean, I am no Biden fan, as I have said many times. If it had been up to me, he would not be, I didn't vote for him, he wouldn't be the nominee. But if considering the situation we're in, I am sitting here hoping that he finds some way to deal with this that can set people's minds at ease to at least some extent and allow us to carry on and win this election and get Donald Trump out of office, because nothing is worse than him. I mean, he's, Donald Trump and what he's doing now. I mean, the world is in danger with him being in there. So fingers crossed that somehow we get through this. It's an awful thing. And God, like I said earlier, let's just put women in from now on, okay? We won't have to deal with this particular thing. We have our problems, but this is not one of them.
I think that would be nice to not have to deal with that that element. That would be for a change.
Very refreshing. Yeah.
It would be very refreshing. All right, let's do this, Heather. We're just about out of time. We got a lot of other stuff to talk about that I don't think we're going to fully get to be frank. So we're going to do something. Let's have you come on the Majority Report this week. And we will talk about those other things. Maybe we'll have to do a head nod, but we should say, just to tick it off, there's a dynamic that is developing where the president has pushed for the openings, that red state governors have pushed for, openings, as it's called. And the governor of Iowa really let the cat out of the bag when she said, hey, we're gonna say that we're open. Your employer's going to call you in. If you think it's too dangerous, you get kicked. You don't get unemployment. And then in Washington, Mitch McConnell says, if we're going to do any more aid, we are going to do, and I guarantee you this is going to be retroactive. There will be no liability for employers who call their workers in, insist that they work, and then they get COVID-19. And there's going to be no recourse. OSHA is basically shut down as far as I can tell. So there's no sort of like federal watchdog. There's going to be no deputies in the form of tort lawyers if Mitch McConnell has his way. And then Donald Trump comes in and says, I don't want to give any stimulus. Let's just cut Social Security, which of course does not, cut Social Security taxes, which does not help people who are not working, and ends up putting pressure and becoming an excuse to cut Social Security down the road. I mean, we're watching the squeeze big time. And that's something I think we can go into quite a bit on the Majority Report Friday afternoon. And you've written a great piece on, I guess, the new Confederacy. Maybe this is the way that we get a couple of different countries out of this.
I said this the other day, I think, when you and I were talking last week or the week before, and we were kind of working ourselves up, and I said, it feels like the country's breaking up. And, you look at this and the way this whole thing is coming down and the way that people are sort of, these governors are having to kind of band together and they're having to fight against each other in some cases. And I mean, the whole thing.
And they're getting their own cops to protect, like, supplies that come in.
Exactly. I mean, in fact, Governor Hogan of Maryland, and he's a Republican. Yep. They asked him today, well, are you worried that the federal government's going to come and seize the masks that you got, that you sent your wife over to, because his wife is Korean, you sent your wife over to Korea to bring back? And he said, well, no, we've got them guarded by the National Guard. I mean, we don't think that they're going to come, as if the federal government is going to, send in the Marines or something to seize the masks. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that we're dealing with, and It's absolutely astonishing. And of course, I mean, the point of the piece that I wrote about this, about the Articles of Confederation, is that, the Articles of Confederation, which, preceded the Constitution, they didn't have a president. And the fact that it didn't have the president was one of the big reasons why they went ahead and wrote the Constitution, because they realized the country didn't function without in an emergency. In those days, they were worried about war, but it could be anything, right? Like a pandemic, maybe. That you can't function as a country unless you have a central government and a leader that's doing it. So they went back and they, created the executive branch and the judiciary. But in those days, they didn't have it. They just had a Congress that meant, that met once in a while. They had no ability to tax. There was all kinds of things. So, I mean, here we are. The truth is that we don't have a president. We don't have one that's actually functioning. What we have is this performance artist who's out there saying a bunch of stuff, and basically he's got some people flailing around doing, nothing of any real consequence, and essentially standing in the way of others trying to do things. And so, the Constitution, it's not functioning at the moment. And, I mean, this is really kind of startling. I don't know that we've ever seen this. I mean, even the Civil War was a completely different thing. We did have a president who was working.
Yep.
I mean, this is really, really new. I mean, when we look back on this, we're going to see this as Donald Trump's presidency as one of the great, great threats to the Constitution that we had, right up there with the Civil War. I really think that's true.
Really, I mean, to our national integrity. And
Exactly.
I can't help but remember conversations that you and I had on this show on the Majority Report in the wake of Donald Trump's election. And I know that we would say something to the effect, we would end a couple of these conversations with, well, I guess we're going to see if the U.S. government can just work and function on its own. We're finally going to get an opportunity to see if, is it really important a president knows what they're doing and are decent. And I feel like he almost made it. There was no big crisis and no big test, but man, oh man. Well, we'll talk more about these things on the Majority Report on Friday, the Friday show. And then, of course, I imagine we will talk more about these things next week on Ring of Fire.
Unfortunate.
Yes, sadly. But Digby, I'm glad that I have you to talk to about it. Thanks so much.
You too, Sam. It makes me feel better. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.